Hi, everybody. I'm Jay Klein of the Capital Research Center. You might recognize my voice from a bunch of the animated videos on this channel, but I don't think I've ever shown my face here before. So it's very nice to meet you all. I am here with Shelby Steele and Eli Steele, who have a new film, What Killed Michael Brown. You can find it at whatkilledmichaelbrown.com. Is that correct?
Yeah,
that is correct.
right.
Good. Lovely. Shelby is a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution. In 2006, he received the Bradley Prize for his contributions to the study of race in America. And in 2004, he was awarded the National Humanities Medal. He has written 5 books, including White Guilt and The Content of Our Character, which received the National Book Critics Circle Award. I've read White Guilt. It's wonderful. I highly recommend it. And Eli Steele is an award-winning filmmaker and graduate of Claremont McKenna College and Pepperdine University School of Public Policy. His career highlights include How Jack Became Black, What's Bugging Seth, winner of 10 film festivals, and Katrina, an MTV network pilot which won him the Breakthrough Filmmakers Award. What Killed Michael Brown marks his first professional collaboration with his father, Shelby Steele. So first question, how did you guys decide to come together and make this film together?
Go ahead.
Okay. We all kind of want to make a movie together. I love the book, White Guilt, and I always thought it would be a great movie in a way, but it's kind of hard to film. And so we kind of back and forth, we kind of try to come up with ideas, try to come up with some kind of platform that we would both be interested in. And in 2014, when Michael Brown was shot and killed in Ferguson, that was sort of a transformative period, because for the first time, we really saw 2 narratives come out of it. And they were not, one was not linear. Normally, you might have what my father calls the poetic truth, like the false narrative, then the reality might come out and then it fades away. But that never happened. The false narrative became the dominant narrative of the shooting, and eventually became accepted in by almost all the major institutions in America, from colleges to corporations. And we were curious. We were curious in a way, why did this happen? Why was there such a need to believe in this? And in many ways, I've used this before, but in many ways, this Ferguson became the new Selma. And people will use that phrase, Selma, it's the Selma of our time. And we're kind of like, no, it's not. Selma is a very real thing that happened, a very real fight against oppression. What happened in Ferguson was completely different. And so we wanted to make a movie that was sort of hold up a mirror to America and say, this is what you did, this is what you created, and why do we do this?
So I guess that opens up to the big question of the film, which is what killed Michael Brown? The implication of that is it's not as simple as we think it is. So what is it then, in short, without having to watch the whole film? What killed Michael Brown?
On the broadest level, what killed Michael Brown was the peculiar liberalism that came out of the 1960s, that was, in a sense, a response to America had just in 1964 passed the Civil Rights Bill. America had confessed its long, terrible collusion with racism. Admitted, owned up to slavery, owned up to Jim Crow segregation, owned up to racism in countless forms. It was, I believe, an extremely heroic moment. I think that admission, that confession in the mid-60s was likely America's greatest moment as a nation, that it could actually own up, admit to that. So it was honorable in every way. But when you confess, you put a sort of clout in the hand of other people, can always sort of hit you with it. You can say, well, you don't have the moral authority to support this argument or whatever it is you're arguing for because you did this, and by your own admission. I think white America's been in that position ever since, of having to prove its innocence of racism from the 1960s on. And never, I'm old. I grew up in segregation, know it well. After the mid-60s, the government couldn't do enough. Welfare expanded. The war on poverty came. Great Society, affirmative action, public housing, school busing, you name it. America couldn't do enough to win back its moral authority, and therefore its legitimacy as a nation. But it worked hard and it wanted to do that, and so it was very helpful. This liberalism was very helpful to whites. It brought back a degree of moral authority. It did absolutely nothing for blacks. It gave them public housing and then it destroyed the black family in America. It gave them school busing. It tore up the entire American education system. It gave them welfare that did nothing more than breed dependency. It's as though this liberalism is as though it was designed to destroy a people rather than uplift a people. It created the world, public housing especially, bad public schools. Michael Brown went to 4 public schools in 4 years. So it created a world that put Michael Brown in the position where on an aimless hot afternoon, he attacked a white cop and lost his life. So the event, the death of this young teenager was, as we argue, indirectly, certainly, but nevertheless caused by the breakdown in Black America that was the result of this liberalism that destroyed our family life, destroyed our value system, created a Black underclass. Michael was a part of that. So ours is a critique of American culture during this period.
So there's certainly a very controversial claim in there, which shouldn't necessarily be controversial given the facts, but it doesn't necessarily seem that everyone is aware of the facts, which is, that Michael Brown charged a police officer and he was charged and the police officer shot in self-defense. I think most people, marching in the Black Lives Matter movement today probably would not recognize that narrative, even though there's been a lot of discussion of that in the years since this has happened. What do you think is going on there? Why is there still such a mistaken narrative in the minds of arguably the majority of Americans? I haven't looked at any polling, but it certainly seems like it could be that way. But why is it that potentially the majority of Americans are still mistaken about what actually happened there?
Well, I think part of it also, my father was talking about the sticky. When you came out of the stickies, you create this need to redeem America. So you create all these social construct ideologies to put Americans on that path towards redemption. And white supremacy was nothing but social constructs that sort of kept everybody in place. Black people are inferior, white people are superior. But we kind of use the same tools for identity politics for today. And so we've come up with ideas like systemic racism, intersectionality, power differential. So we create almost every possible explanation to reduce Americans to skin color. So somebody who adapt that way of thinking All they need to see is white cop, black kid. That's it. Just to kind of give you an example, I was at the white privilege conference, and they were saying that this justice system needs to move from intent, like what goes on in the mind of a criminal, to impact. So in other words, if it's a white cop shoots a black kid, that's all you need to know is racism. And so they've adopted this very simplistic way of thinking. But if you see everything in race, well, then how can you ever move beyond race to a better place?
Oh, okay, that leads into another question for you guys. Been very curious about, which is, you open the film with the claim that race is never an end, but always a means, and that race has no role in human affairs. I obviously completely agree with this, and it's core to the film. But to play devil's advocate, what I think Black Lives Matter activists might say, or not even just Black Lives Matter activists, but a large amount of people out there, is that they don't want race to matter either. You know, that's the goal. But as long as there is still racist and institutional racism, you know, just ignoring it, you know, they call colorblindness, and they mock that. They say it's wishful thinking and it won't actually make it go away. So how do you respond to that? I mean, couldn't it be the case that there are still a bunch of racist cops out there, and then aren't you calling just for us to ignore that? Or is there evidence to the contrary?
Well, no, I mean, I would never want to ignore racist cops. On the other hand, I'm not one to make a national issue out of policing, bad racist policing, when very little of it actually exists to begin with. But mainly, if you look at what Black Lives Matter and other groups like that are saying, they all say the same thing. They all come from a belief that came out of the 60s. Here again, I hate to keep going back to the 60s, but that's where things started that we're dealing with today. When America admitted it was its mistake, it's evil, it's wrong doing, and had to then redeem itself, so that had the effect of taking the victimization that Blacks experience, the racism that they experience. And if they could claim racism, they could get the larger society to give them things, to change, to pass new laws, to create new programs, to, as we very quickly did, to create what we call today the grievance industry of minorities who, in a sense, constantly claim victimization, claim racism, so they can manipulate the larger society. In other words, racism becomes a means to power. It is power in itself. And so the one thing Black Lives Matter and other groups like that will fight you to the end if you say, you know, Blacks are not remotely as victimized as they used to be. White America's made a lot of moral progress. There isn't literally as much racism anywhere. And I can testify to the truth of that, having been born and raised in a segregated America and seeing the change, which stuns me still. I have segregation flashbacks, as I like to call them all the time. So my victimization is something now that Black militant groups are clinging to, because they sense that that's where their power is. And it is a tragedy, because then it infuses the younger generation, Black Lives Matter, it infuses them with a Black identity that, as I call, is victim focused. I'm Black because I'm a victim. I'm a victim that's synonymous with being Black. I'm not a free man. Don't say I'm free. You want to make a Black Lives Matter person angry? Tell him he's free. I say you're free all the time. If you grew up and knew what real segregation was, you would know you're free. You can be the president if you want. You can do anything. But they will fight you to the end, tooth and nail, to argue that they're not free. Well, what a sad, ironic, and tragic circumstance for a group to find itself in that's trying to overcome 4 centuries of victimization, to then find themselves gaining power by clinging to the victimization, by exploiting it, by using it to manipulate their way through society. So whites, on the other hand, don't really know much. If they look at this and they're confused. They know they're not racist as they used to be, but they don't have any confidence in themselves. They're not allowed to say that. And so there we have this stalemate where no one can really can talk. What we try to do in the film is dive into the center of all of that. And Michael Brown was again a tragic figure, but you see those forces at work in his fate, in the tragedy of his fate.
I'd love to dive in on the psychology of that, because, I wonder, it seems to me to be the case that there's definitely an activist class where it is power. They want to use this to achieve certain ends. But I wonder to what extent the desire for power is broadly representative of people that believe and push for these narratives and are, seemingly trying to make the world a better place. And the people that want power are trying to make the world a better place too. They're just wrong, right? We hear a lot about, African-American parents having to give their children the talk, about, be extra safe around. Sorry.
It's not your fault. I just get very impatient when I hear that.
All right. Well, let me finish my question.
What a hustle.
Yeah. Well, okay.
And whites don't know they're being hustled. I grew up in segregation, in an all-Black segregated community, segregated schools. There was no need to give me a talk.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that you now have to give kids a talk to let them know, and all you're doing is infusing them with fear and anxiety. You should give them a talk to tell them how free they are, what a blessing freedom is, how hard their people worked to win their freedom. But to sit a young kid down there, oh, you're going to run into this, and it's going to be hard for you, and you're going to be overwhelmed. This is suicidal. We're killing off the spirit we ought to be trying to, the courage to go out in the world and make the world your oyster.
Well,
Find yourself.
I completely hear and agree with what you're saying there. I don't think victimhood, when it's not actually present, is, psychologically healthy. But nonetheless, it seems to be the case that the parents that are worried about, having to have that talk with their kids, or actively having that talk with their kids, or whatever, it seems to be the case that in their head, from the parents' perspective, they're not worried about necessarily broad societal power in that moment. They're worried.
They are.
Okay, you think so?
I think so. I think it's a part of the collective experience, the collective identity. If you're Black, the way you gesture your identity is to claim victimization, claim that racism is systemic. It's everywhere. It's institutional. It's structural. It's just as ubiquitous as the air itself. Because as you extend racism, this evil, what Blacks are really doing is expanding their territory of entitlement. They're saying, you don't just owe me for an isolated incident of a tragedy like Michael Brown shot by, but you owe me for systemic racism. Mm-hmm. So you're in debt to me. And I'm owed And I'm looking for preference. I'm looking for to be treated that way, to be offered things. I want entitlements. And so we take our own history, the tragedy of our history, and it's all the victimization we endured. And again, we turn it into a hustle. We try to shake down the larger society. And we're good at it. We've pretty much taken over education in America. Education is now taught from the point of view of Black victimization. And whites just say, they don't know what to do. They still get confused, don't know what to do. They don't see they're being had.
One thing that's sort of interesting is that in my own life, I mean, I've been pulled over by the police for money because that looks like I fit the profile of some robberies and things that's happened. I've also had 2 separate incidents where the police pulled guns on me. One of them in the South Side of Chicago almost got shot. What's interesting is when I tell that story, because I'm deaf, some people in the deaf community want me to turn that story into some sort of a larger victimization story. And part of me is like, what those incidences were almost like a perfect storm of things that I almost fault the police officer. I mean, they're usually, when they find out that I'm deaf, they usually are stunned, and you should see the relief on their face. They had no idea that they were trying to communicate with me or something like that. But my point is that the power is to turn this, whatever power we have in the deaf community, but is to turn that into some sort of a political coin and exploit that in something bigger. But then what happens if I do that? I become trapped in that. I become the symbol for that victimization. And it comes at a personal cost to me. And then I choose to take, the point of view that yes, that was tragic. Yeah, it scared the crap out of me. But thank God the police officer who's well trained, they did not fire, they did not make a mistake. And I'm thankful for that. But it's really interesting because the way you choose to go affects how you live your life.
I think there's multiple types of power that it would be maybe useful to disambiguate. I think, when I hear you talking about power, it's about people owing the community things, right? So let's call that, just for the sake of conversation right now, policy power. But I think there's another type of power that might be relevant in this, which is psychological power, one's own self-image. And I want to ask you about this because, I grew up in the Jewish American community. And what I found there when I was growing up was a lot of people complaining about anti-Semitism who I know, never experienced anti-Semitism once in their life. I happen to think, existing online, anti-Semitism has maybe gotten a little worse in the last couple of years, but it's still negligible. And certainly when I was growing up, none of my friends or family friends who were complaining about anti-Semitism were actually experiencing any. But, I don't that often see, Jewish Americans, they're not asking for like reparations or, policy power sort of things. But when I tried to figure out what was going on there, the best explanation that I could come up with was it was sort of a search for a psychological power, a sense that if anything goes wrong in my life, not anything, but certain things, right, I can blame it on, my identity. And then I don't have to feel bad about it, right? And then when I do achieve things, I can feel a sense of I overcame something real hard, and I can feel even more rewarded mentally for it. Do you think that's part of it as well? And how would you weigh those against each other?
People, my father comes to the quick thing is the Jewish lesson from the Holocaust. The best revenge is the life best lived. So if you want revenge over Hitler, if you want revenge, you live your life, and you live your life the way you're supposed to. You become somebody. My grandfather was in the Lower East Side, probably like 2 or 3 years after the war, and he went into this tenement, and all the relatives were crying. They were still crying over family members that they had lost. and how much better life would be if those people were here. And so my grandfather basically said, what are you crying about? What good is that going to do for you? You need to go work. You need to do something now. And so that's what he did. And almost everybody in that room died. Middle class or better. But they had to psychologically accept that they would never get justice.
Eli's father was a Holocaust survivor. I mean, his grandfather, excuse me, was a Holocaust survivor. And great man, learned a lot from him. About this use of victimization as power. This is the tragedy of post-60s liberalism in America, is that we allowed, in our desire to redeem ourselves from the past, we thought we'd pay off victimization. And so it became power to minorities. And so they claim victimization all the time, everywhere at this point. And within universities, within corporations, there are HR departments that now insist on, see their employees and so forth as victims. And it's transformed the curriculum in most universities. So it's a lot. It's not an idle power. It's an extremely powerful. Last year they eliminated the SAT exam at California University of California for admissions on the basis that it was because of the racial disparities and performance and so forth. So almost in honor of this victimization. Well, a society that keeps responding that way is going to destroy itself, going to eat up. My argument is that if you come from a group, as I do, that had 4 centuries of oppression, you don't need people to lower standards for you. You need people now to raise them. Ask us to perform at the same level or higher than everybody else. This is the sort of the perversion, the corruption that we try to get to in this film. And Michael Brown is a great example of it, because again, the hunger of so many people in America to rush into this little town, Ferguson, and get a piece of that action, get a piece of that power, was dramatic, a dramatic, vivid display of this corruption that I think now threatens. You see it years later in the George Floyd demonstrations and so forth. I'm sure we'll see it again.
Well, let's talk about the George Floyd stuff real quick before we wrap up. It seems to me that, I mean, well, first of all, this film is coming out at the perfect time, because, of what happened this year, as tragic as it is. I'm glad that we have this film to think about in the wake of it. But so we put out on our YouTube channel a video about the Black Lives Matter movement in the wake of, the events with George Floyd and all the protests that happened in the summer. We did it with our mutual friend, Bob Woodson. He narrated that video for us. And it goes through, all the things that Black Lives Matter, thinks, but you don't always hear in the protests, but they'll say very openly on their websites that, police brutality isn't their only or main cause. They want to abolish capitalism. They praise Fidel Castro. They want to abolish police and prisons. They want to replace the nuclear family with communal child raising like they had in the early Soviet Union or on Israeli kibbutzes, both of which were very failed experiments. Yet, after the events with Michael Brown and after the events with George Floyd, we see, we see this organization and this movement, rising to, insane heights. I mean, we listed at the end of our video all the major corporations that gave money to the official Black Lives Matter organization, even though they support all that stuff. And I mean, you wouldn't believe it. It's the Pokemon company, supports Black Lives Matter
I
financially.
know.
Like,
It's,
that's nuts. I mean, what?
because they want their imprimatur of racial innocence.
Yeah. Do you think, um, do you think that most of the people that are being big activists on this cause right now, do they know about all the stuff that Black Lives Matter actually supports, or do they know and they just don't care?
Well, I know some of them. One of them said, did you know that the police were slave patrols, began as slave patrols? And I was like, yeah, but the point is that person never knew that. So when you give a new piece of information to that person, they just blow it way up and they conflate, for about 200 years, and and flatten that. And to every cop is literally a rescue standing of slave patrol. And I mean, so that's sort of a naivete in the way they're thinking. Just think about the defund the police. If you go into if you run into focus city around Campbell and told them that we want to take away the police, what do you think they would say? This is the place where Michael Brown was shot. No, they don't want to get rid of the police. The crime is up, everything up after Michael Brown was shot. So that's what Black Lives Matters. It's all these big ideas, but there's no real grounding in reality.
One thing that I think is important, and something I've written a lot about, and that I think is relevant here, is white guilt. White guilt is a phenomenon I think is very much underrated in American life. I think it's extremely powerful. White guilt, in a sense, makes room for Black Lives Matter and other groups like that that are trading on their victimization. White guilt is the other side of that. It says, what can corporate America, here, Amazon just gave Black Lives Matter $100 million.
And $10 million.
Excuse me, $10 million. Wow, what for? Who gets that money? What is it? Well, it's white guilt money, because what Amazon wants to do is say, we're not racist, and $10 million is nothing to us. And so Black Lives Matters then takes $10 million and has a good time with it, and says how our culture has come to the place in America where we basically exist to shake down America. Our future in getting ahead, we're not going to get ahead through innovation and hard work. We're going to get ahead through shakedown. And so they love Black victimization. They love that Michael Brown was killed by a white cop, that it's money in the bank for them. Well, that's the race as a means to power. Race as a means to power for whites, who then can say, I'm not guilty anymore. And race as a means to power to Blacks, who say, I'm more entitled than I ever was. And there are not enough reparations. There never will be.
So then for the average person, or also one of these corporations that are giving money to this like explicitly communist movement, would you say, it's not necessarily that they don't know, or it's not either that they know and don't care, but it's that maybe they don't know and they don't care to find out?
That's pretty good.
Oh, well,
I think that's right on the money.
Okay, I do want to ask you, I know we're running out of...
They don't care to find out. They don't want to find out. That's why Amazon canceled us. They don't want that to know. They're not saying it's not true. They just don't want it out there. Thankfully, they retreated. So I give them credit for that. But
yeah, I didn't even think to ask you guys about that.
That denial. Both sides are trying to say, don't look at the real us.
Yeah. We have nothing with it. We have nothing to offer Amazon.
Uh-huh.
We have nothing to offer Amazon. If you think about that, our vision, our view, it offers nobody anything except basically a reality check. It tells you this is what happened. Here we are. Black Lives Matter offers you two things: the animus, or you get racial forgiveness. So if you reject Black Lives Matter, you're on the other side. You're Uncle Tom. You're Coon. If you accept them, then you get that badge that you're now racist, that you're being an anti-racist.
Mm-hmm.
That's an enormous power to have. And we, because of our position, we don't offer anybody anything. So that's why people will just ignore us and walk over us. So that's the enormous psychological power that Black Lives Matter has. And any Black has.
We want Americans to stop allowing themselves to be blackmailed.
So just because not all of our viewers might be familiar with the background, do you want to tell us what exactly happened with Amazon?
You want to do that, Eli?
Yeah. No, we wanted to get the film out on before the election, because we figured the race would be a discussion. And Amazon is the one that, Amazon of all the platforms like iTunes and so forth, has a shorter window, 2 or 3 weeks. So we submitted, and after 2 days, we were put into content review. And basically the criteria for that are like 4 things, which is offensive content, and then 3 other things like public domain, things that we never qualified or fit into. So there's really no reason to put us into that. And then they held us in content review for quite a long time. Then on October 13th, we got a letter from Amazon that basically said your documentary has been rejected. It does not qualify for resubmission, and you kind of put the lock on everything. You cannot appeal. So it was a 300% rejection. And so we, like most Americans, if an opportunity closes, you look for somebody else. So we moved on. We said, okay, forget it. And we went on to Vimeo, or Vimeo, whatever it's called, and got the film on there. While we were doing that, we had massive publicity with the Wall Street Journal, Fox News, National Review, and several other publications came to our defense and raised an outcry over why we have been canceled by Amazon. I'm sure once you see the movie, you're not going to see an equality issue with the film. And so why have we been rejected? Then on Friday, Amazon put the film on the platform without notifying us. And so, but you can't do that, because once you say no, you forfeit all rights to the property, to the intellectual property. So basically, you put it up there and take it 50%, and I have no idea. So we issued our lawyer told us to have them seize this and take it down. And so they did. Then they did this on Sunday, and then on Tuesday, they reached out again. And we had a conversation, we exchanged emails, and basically I told them my side of the story, they said their side of the story. They're a corporation, so they're never going to admit what happened. But they admitted basically that they need to improve things on their side, the way the whole process was. And I remain convinced that the only possible explanation for why we, of all the films, were pulled into content review was policy. I mean, we have a title called "What Killed Michael Brown," and and then and the Amazon claimed that they sent that letter by mistake. That's a pretty big mistake she made. That's too many coincidences, too many things. That one coincidence maybe, but not 2, 3. And so obviously that leads me to believe it's really political. But it shows the power of the voice. We had a lot of fans, customers calling up Amazon and leaving messages. And so at first I was kind of like, yeah, that's really going to have an impact. But the once I started getting the email and see on Twitter, see on Facebook, and I was like, oh, wow, okay, these people really know that people are calling and protesting. And so now we're on Amazon. And it's been a great platform. I mean, it's a huge platform. It's the only way we should get the message out.
And
So we had our moment of glory, our David and Goliath. We were David for a moment.
I don't think.
I made the film in my bedroom. I mean, I live in a small apartment. I get from my bed, I walk like 2 steps, I make the film. I edit it. We communicate over, over FaceTime, and then we have to all of a sudden go to war with Amazon. So it's sort of surreal in a way. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, they always, anytime they do something like that, they always call it a mistake. You know, when we get into issues with like YouTube or any of the social media companies, and then we have to put pressure on them, it's always, oh, it was a mistake. We didn't mean to do it every single time. But, you know, they completely undervalue the Streisand effect. And, you know, luckily for you guys, you have the Wall Street Journal on your side. And,
Yes.
you know, you have Shelby, who has, you know, a lot of recognition out in the public and can go out and get attention. And you have the Streisand effect, where, you know, the harder they try to bury something, the easier, the more people just want to go and see it. So you guys are the winners.
But imagine if I didn't have my father.
Yeah.
How would I have? I mean, that's what's so damaging about Amazon, because I think they underestimated us. You know, they really understand the leverage that we could bring, but that's very damaging to artistry, because the whole point of an artist is to go where other people don't want to go. But why they spend 2.5 years making a movie? I'm not going to be able to platform it.
Yeah.
That's why it's a huge issue. And if we've had that fear in the beginning, you know what, it would be too controversial for Amazon. Well, you would never have a film, a public record that opposes the popular narrative.
Yeah, it's the same thing when we get our content censored, is they'll always fix it for us, but I want to keep fighting, because, you know, what if I didn't have, you know, a known organization with a budget, you know, behind me? What if I was just some independent content producer? You know, we'd never be able to get anything done. So the policies, or, you know, they're not policies, I guess, but the systems in which, you know, these companies work have to change. Okay, I know we ran a little bit over time. I had a bunch of other questions I wanted to ask you guys, but I won't keep you too long. Eli, do you want to let people know, remind people where they can see the film, and anything else you want them to know about it?
The best place to see the film or get all the information is you go to whatkilledmichaelbrown.com. Everything there.
All right. Thank you guys so much. It's a really great film. Definitely follow Eli's instructions. Go to that website, watch it. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us, and good luck to you in your endeavors.
Thanks.